Hello. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Rachel. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Have you, okay, no, I see we got other people joining the call. All right. Hi, welcome. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. All right. I think let's just jump right into it. So this session here is FutureFeed end user training number 2. Okay. So I'm assuming you guys have all gone to training session number 1. And today in the training, we are going to cover assess, system security plan, and your FutureFeed, POA&M, as well as the deliverables. And then I think we will have covered everything in the tool. So I'm just going to get started. And well, let me first open up the floor. Does anyone have any questions related to what was covered or talked about in the first training session? I'm happy to go back and kind of address any issues or questions you may have had while you were, doing what we talked about in the last session in the tool. So does anybody have any questions?
I know Zach and I had met after and we are aligning. We may have a question, but I think it's going to depend upon this training. And then once we go in and start trying to do stuff ourselves, once
Okay.
we try to do stuff ourselves, I think that's when the questions are going to come out. So the both of us did schedule the every week 1:30s.
Okay, cool. Cool.
Zach, did I miss anything?
Nope, that's about right.
Okay. All right, so let's review this assess area. So this is obviously where you're going to be capturing the status of the requirements in your environment and defining how those requirements are being implemented in your environment, as well as providing the evidence. So this is, for internal use only area. Some folks have gotten confused in the past and have thought that this area is maybe where their assessor or the C3PAO fills out, but this is definitely an area that's for the user themselves, FutureFeed user themselves to fill out. And then if you have any, once you start getting into the annual security control assessment or continuous monitoring phases of your compliance program, then every once in a while you'll use this section here in FutureFeed to help do and lead those internal assessment activities. All of the requirements have these 6 sections here. Did I get them all minimized? Yep. So they all have this requirement satisfaction summary section. Let's go over that. This is where you're going to define at a high level how the requirements being implemented. We actually have 2 areas to define implementation method. So you have this summary notes area, and then you have the objective statement sections down here where you can define specifically how that one specific objective is being implemented. And so you have 2 areas to define implementations, objective statement and this summary notes area. It's up to you if you want to use them both. I use them both in my management activities. The way I like to use this summary notes area is just to keep the discussion at the control level. So when I say control, I'm not referring to this. This is referred to as the requirement. This is the requirement. And when someone says control, what they're actually talking about is the product that was implemented to meet the requirements. So sometimes it's a tool, sometimes it's an administrative process, manual process, or a combination of the both. And so in the summary notes, I described the control as a whole that is helping me meet this requirement. And then in the objectives, I just speak directly to that objective. And I highly recommend you guys fill out the assessment objective areas just because it will help you during your assessment. Assessors love it when they look at a SSP that's written at the objective level because they have to assess at the objective level. And then also for your guys' own internal assessment purposes, the more clear you can be in your SSP, the better, because then when you go and do your annual assessment and you have to evaluate some stuff internally, that the definition in here is going to, refresh your memory on how that requirement was implemented and give guidance on how to conduct that internal assessment. So the requirement satisfaction summary, you're defining the implementation and status. As you see here, status is at the objective level because if you fail one objective, you do end up failing the overall requirement in the world of CMMC, with the exception of two requirements. There's partial credit that can be given, but as a general rule of thumb, if you fail one objective, you end up failing the overall requirement. And so we're tracking implementation or status at the objective level, which will help you identify any gaps if you have any. So, I mean, how I do an assessment, I usually start by reading the requirement, and then I read about how that requirement is being implemented in the environment. And then I move on to the objectives and I go one objective at a time. So this first one here, the means of limiting unsuccessful attempts, is defined. And of course, your environment is going to be empty. When you first got access to FutureFeed, there was nothing in it. So you will have to take some time to develop out these and write out these details. And so here is how I would define this objective. The means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined in my access control policy. And now, since I'm calling out a document, I want to make sure that that document is tagged down below. So I'll scroll down in my examine section where I find all my evidence, my documentation evidence. And I'll want to see that my access control policy is linked, and there it is. And so I'm gonna mark this one met, and because I have the evidence, I have my implementation details, and I've validated that everything's implemented, so I'd mark it met. The next objective is the objective where you're going to start wanting to see screenshots or configuration reports. So here, the defined means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is implemented. So we needed to define how that definition in my access control policy is being implemented and enforced in my environment. And so when I write up statements that are technical, like this objective here is very technical. And so when I write up my statements, this is how I like to write them up. I always think about my assessment scope, and I address how that objective is being implemented on all of my assets in my assessment scope. So, and I just wanted to point this out. because this is a common failure I've seen in some of the assessments I've been on, is where the company will just, you know, address the main assets in their environment, like their endpoints, and they'll leave it at that. They fail to address, well, how is this objective being implemented on your file server? Or how's it being implemented on your firewall or in your SIEM solution? And so, um, just remember when it comes to the technical objectives, I recommend taking time to just refresh your memory on the assessment scope and make sure that you have a good idea or a good understanding of everywhere in your environment that requirement needs to be implemented, so you can address all of the different ways it needs to be implemented in your SSP. So like this here. So I've addressed how my windows are picking up this requirement by Entra ID, and I go on to say how my firewall is not managed by Entra ID, but there's a local configuration setting that restricts the limit of unsuccessful logon attempts. File server, then I have an application. And so for this application, my Prevail application, um, the application needs to implement a limit of logon attempts, but I can't control that. I'm not responsible for configuring the application to do that. Prevail itself is the vendor or the supplier. And so for this here, all I say is this requirement is fully inherited from Prevail. See the Prevail CRM. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight that is when there's some inheritance involved or shared responsibility with implementing the requirements, then I do make sure to call out that inheritance or that shared responsibility in my implementation narratives, as I'm showing you here. And I refrain from giving details, and I like to reference where those details can be found. So instead of me saying exactly how the Prevail application implements a limit of logon attempts, that information will be found in the Prevail security documentation that they provide and maybe their customer responsibility matrix. And so I'm just going to point to that document so an assessor can go look at the details there. That way, if Prevail ever makes a change and they have to change their customer responsibility matrix, I don't also have to go and change my SSP because I didn't provide that level of detail. All I have to do is just ask Prevail for an updated CRM and then log into FutureFeed, delete out my old CRM and upload the new CRM, and there we go. The details are accurate. Tracking, does that make sense? Okay, so I mentioned inheritance in the statement, so now I'm going to want to make sure my inheritance status indicator is appropriately set and aligns with what I said in my statement. So for this objective here, I'm not going to mark that it's fully inherited because it's only fully inherited for my Prevail component, for one asset, for one component of my whole assessment boundary. So it's only fully inherited and Prevail. It's not inherited anywhere else for my Windows or firewall, and so that's my responsibility to implement. And so overall, the objective is partially inherited. So I would set my indicator, make sure it aligns, and then click on the little icon, the number icon, or if this is your first time selecting inheritance, for example, I'll show you over here. Like if I select inheritance, it's going to give me this triangle. So here it's just wanting me to identify where that inheritance is coming from. So on the last one, I would click on it and I'm going to make sure that my Prevail is selected, and then I had some inheritance for Entra ID, like for example purposes. So here I'm just very clearly identifying where that inheritance is coming from with respect to all of the assets in my environment. Okay.
And Rachel, is it accurate to say, like, as an assessor, are you looking for every single place within the boundary that an account lockout feature exists should be documented on this assessment objective?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that could be a pretty lengthy list in a lot of cases.
Yeah, in some cases. Yeah, it can be. And you don't have to go into too much detail like I did here. But you have to define the implementation method. And so if that implementation method is different because you have different asset types, and maybe this asset's picking it up from a group policy, but this asset over here isn't picking it up from a group policy, it needs to be configured locally. Or this asset over here, it's in the cloud and it's being configured by my external service provider. So yes, address the implementation method for the assets that are in scope. If that implementation method is different because you have different asset types and the implementation's different, then make sure you address that in your SSP. I would recommend doing that, yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so that's kind of like a little highlight of, I guess, how I would do an assessment is read the requirement, read the objective. If you guys don't have results from a previous assessment, you're doing a brand, an actual assessment, internal assessment. Then when you were logging your tools and logging your documents, and if you remember, you were establishing connections between the tools and the documents and the requirements. Well, when you did that, that's the documents show up under examine, and then the tools show up under test. And so if you're just getting started with FutureFeed and these summary notes here are blank, you're going to have to work on developing this narrative. And you're going to have a good understanding of what exactly is implemented to meet this requirement. And just how is that control that's implemented meeting the requirement? Provide me some of that detail. And so if you've connected some documents, you'll kind of look down here for some answers in your assessment, and the tools here, you can see what kind of tools you have available to help you meet that requirement. But you'll spend time developing out this narrative and marking things met or not met. If things are met, if you mark something met, I would highly recommend having this statement filled out and making sure you have your evidence found down below. Me personally, when I was doing compliance management, I did not mark things met until I had the evidence in my hand. And that was true when I was doing DoD compliance management for RMF and EMAS. And that's because, and I used to be a consultant a year ago. So when I was doing consulting, if someone told me that something was implemented, I didn't mark it met until I actually saw that proof. But it's your guys' company and your guys' call on how you want to handle that. But I would recommend, maybe leaving it in an unknown state, or you could mark it met and create a POA&M. You could still create a POA&M, and it could just be for, provide that evidence. So now it's tracked on your POA&M and you won't forget about it. Or maybe you mark it not met and you create a POA&M. It's your call, but the goal would be to eventually at some point get the evidence into FutureFeed, because then you're going to have all your evidence in FutureFeed and it's going to be your body of evidence, and it's going to be ready to go when you engage that C3PAO and you do your assessment. Notice in FutureFeed that when you mark something not met, it will create that first POA&M entry for you, so that's nice. You're not going to end up with some failures that you forgot to add to your system POA&M. So they all get added automatically. And then what you'll do is you'll open this up and just modify this description. So it's going to come pre-populated with just some helpful like remediation guidance or implementation guidance. But this is meant for you to tailor it and be specific to your own environment. You know, what was the actual failure in your environment and what's the fix look like in your environment. And then set impact, effort, cost, due date. You can do it by quarters or dates, and then assign some responsibility. Okay, so that's the requirement satisfaction summary section area. Then you have interview. So it's just using the RACI model. So who is all responsible, accountable, consultant, or informed for this one requirement. These are all people that could potentially be interviewed during any external or internal assessments. Okay, so fill out the RACI model, and this will help you know and identify who you got to bring to the table when you have that assessment with that C3PO. These are all the people that the assessor can pull from to do any interviews or tests. Examine, so all your documents are here. So as you're going through all of the requirements in the assess area, make sure your documents are appropriately connected to the requirements. So here, I'm going to keep that one, but I see I have something here and I don't know why I don't need that, you know? So cleaning it up. Make sure you only have the evidence that you want here. If you have a bunch of unnecessary evidence here, then assessors are going to start looking at things that they don't need to be looking at for this one requirement. It's going to cause confusion, lengthen the assessment and examination process because they have more documents to look at, and potentially open you up for, you know, a whole bunch of side conversations and one-off discussions that could lead to failures or other issues. And then the test area. So down here, you just have the technology. In this area, you're going to link any technology that is implementing the requirement or helping you implement the requirement. Okay. And then down here, you have a place to house any additional artifacts. So this is where you upload some evidence if you'd like. Just know that any evidence you upload here is only ever going to be associated with the 318 requirement. And then you have DoD's essential or assessment considerations. So if you're doing that internal assessment and you want, you could use these questions here. These are questions that a typical assessor would ask for this requirement. And you can open them up and even answer them. If you answer them, you could fill out the narrative. If you say no, then you're creating a POA&M item, a POA&M description. Okay, so you can fill them out, mark them not applicable, all that stuff. You don't have to use them. You don't have to use this. Some people do, some people don't. That's the 6 sections of a control requirement, a requirement. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. The system security plan. So this is a browser view of your SSP. You can go over to the deliverables area, and under SSP, you can run an SSP report where it's going to be a Word document, hundreds of pages long, right? But why we implemented this SSP area is so you could review or just really view your system security plan in a nice, like easy to navigate way. So all of these are different sections of your SSP. Here's your compliance scope, company information. Here's some more system environment information. And then here's the requirements that get listed out. And so in this browser view of your SSP, what you're going to do is you're going to review your SSP. For example, you would just click through each section and start reviewing the information. If something's inaccurate, then just click on the pencil icon and it will bring you back to that section of FutureFeed where that information is being captured. And then you could edit the information. And now when I go back to my SSP, it's been updated. Okay, so you want to do your reviewing of your SSP and your editing of your SSP in here because it's a lot easier to navigate and quickly make updates with just a couple clicks of the button. Also, there's a couple fields in here that you have to fill out. So if you see any red, that means something's missing. So here it's telling me that under user devices, I need to go through here and just identify, how many Windows 10 devices do I have? Maybe I only have 10. And I don't really have any of these other devices here, but maybe I got a couple of these. So it wants me to give user device approximate count. Over here, it looks like I got an error. I didn't ever provide my hardware listing, so I got to open this up and then upload, my hardware listing. So check out the red. There's some things that are missing or need to be filled out. And then check out this requirements area because any assessor that has access to your FutureFeed environment, this SSP area is the only thing they're going to be able to view. And so this is how they're going to navigate your SSP and view all of your evidence. Is they would it looks similar to the assess page, right? How it's laid out, but we're really in the SSP. And they would click on here, read how you're implementing things, interview some of these people. They're going to scroll down, keep scrolling down here. My objective B, here's how it's implemented. They're going to read that. And then they'll start seeing my evidence. So here's all my tools and my documents, right? So here they're going to start looking at my evidence and they'll be able to see approved versions of my document and the working version and any completed tasks. Okay. So that's all you're doing in the SSP in here is reviewing and editing and approving your SSP. You could use this compliance review box. Okay. So if I assign this page here to Jeff, well, because he knows a lot about the system information, but over here, maybe I'm going to give the system topology section to my IT administrator because he's going to give me that. So you can use this review section here to sign out the responsibility to review the different sections of the SSP to people, then they can mark them reviewed and even mark them approved here as well, okay? Then after you're done reviewing and approving, editing your SSP, your next step would be to check out and visit your system's POA&M, which is called your FutureFeed. So this is your FutureFeed system POA&M. And at this point, if you had approached populating FutureFeed like we've discussed in this training session where you fill out people and then go move on and work on tools and documents, then do an assessment, then review your SSP. And then at this point in time, you will have made a whole bunch of POA&M items for all of the failures in the assess area. If you had any documents that were still in draft, you would have put them on your system POA&M. If you have any tools that are non-compliant, or maybe you're planning to acquire a new tool, you could put all of that on your system POA&M. And so now at this point in time, you should have a pretty accurate listing of all your non-compliance or your gaps on your system POA&M. And so now you're going to want to start reviewing them and making sure all this metadata like impact, effort, cost, due date, all that stuff is set. And then even start building out projects. So instead of working on 46 different POA&M line items, because I have 46 open right now, my goal would be to put them all in a project. So instead of trying to follow up on 46 different items, maybe I just got to follow up on 5 different projects because I've grouped them all into projects and assigned them to the right people to get that work started. To group things into projects, you just select what you want. So for example, I usually like to filter by proposed projects. So I filter over here by proposed projects, and now all of these things that just have a plus, they're not part of a project yet. So my goal would be get them into a project so I don't have to, follow up on them one at a time. So now this first one, this is a procedure. So there's a procedure that needs to be finished. That's a procedure. Here's a plan, here's a procedure. So here's all my documentation items, and I'm going to add them to my security documentation project. I already got one started. I already have a tech writer and a security guy working on my documents. And so I'm going to add these new POA&M items to that project because they're going to be working on those too. So I'm going to hit add to project, or I could even go over here and define a new and create a whole new project if I needed to. But let me add those to them. Okay, they're part of that project now. And then I just keep going on. So this one is a tool, something about MFA needs to be implemented on the tool. Well, I'm going to put that part of my, IT department work because they're going to implement that tool. Okay. So now instead of reviewing each one of these items and kind of figuring out like who needs to be working on what and checking in on that project with them, I'm going to go over here and I'm just going to handle these. It's a lot more manageable to tackle. So now I need to follow up on all of these different projects and make sure that the work's still going. There's no roadblocks, no issues, right? There's other metadata to be captured in the project, like overall impact, effort, and cost, due dates, RACI, responsibility, status, pricing. You have a place to upload project documentation. Oops. And then we got the listing of all the individual POA&M items down here. To close one out, just hit the green button. You can define what was fixed if you're required to. It's up to your company and how you guys want to handle managing POA&Ms. But that's how you close something out, is just hitting the green mark and logging the activity. And now I can see that in this project, here's all my open, and then here's all of my completed items that are part of the project. I could send updates directly to my ticketing system by clicking on this this little mail icon here. If I want to send status updates to my ticketing system, I can do that for my project area. Okay. So yeah, once you're in this stage of the process, now you have a listing of all these non-compliant issues, all these vulnerabilities or system flaws, and you need to start engaging the right people and getting the work done on them. Then over deliverables, so we have this cyber readiness presentation builder, and it's meant to help you build quick reports or presentations using the data from FutureFeed. You're doing all this work in FutureFeed, why not use it to report with? So it's as easy as just selecting what you want visible in your presentation. Okay, so let's say I'm going to meet with I'm going to meet with the individual that's working on that documentation project, because I need to let them know that I just added 3 new POA&M items to that project, so they have 3 more tasks or things that they have to accomplish. So let's say I want to show a little bit of metrics about my POA&M, and then I'm going to go find that actual project here, security documents. So I'm going to make that one visible. Okay, so you just select what you want visible and then go up here and hit generate. It will either download a report or you could present directly from FutureFeed. And then here, a little bit of POA&M metrics. And then here's my one project I have open right now and all of the individual items that are part of it. Okay. Also in this deliverables section, so you can run a report or a presentation, you could export all of your POA&Ms or your POA&M projects if you need to. This is also where you're exporting and running an SSP report. Then what you could do is open up. Let's say that this was my last SSP that I downloaded and I want it approved. I can approve the report by clicking on the approval, which it's already been approved, so I'll delete it, but click on this and I can mark things approved in the date and even like provide some signature if I want to mark my old SSP reports as approved. Okay. You can also export all of your files and the data from FutureFeed. Here, whenever you want to engage a C3PAO, they're going to ask you for your body of evidence. They want you to send over your SSP and all of your policies, procedures, screenshots, any other evidence that you have that shows proof you are meeting these requirements. They want you to send that over when you first engage a C3PAO. They want to see that because they want to know if you're ready for an assessment. And so when you have to do that, you're going to use this export capability here. So you'll export all of the files and the data that's in FutureFeed. Go ahead. I would recommend, after some time of using FutureFeed is to generate this export so you could see what it looks like. What happens is it's a zip file. And all of those documents that you put into FutureFeed, all those, everything you uploaded or even created in FutureFeed in that live document editor, it's going to be they're all going to be in a zip file and they're all named and there's a naming scheme to them. And then there's one file in that data export. It's an index. And so it's an Excel spreadsheet. You open it up. It will list out all of the documents in the export. And it's going to list out all of the requirements that that document is associated with, meaning that document is evidence for that requirement or those requirements. So I'd check it out. It's pretty cool. But that's pretty much it. I think I went through that fairly quickly today. So we have some time for questions. I'm going to open up the floor for questions now. Does anyone have any?
Nothing at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any either right now.
All right. Well, then I think this is the shortest I've ever finished. So I guess we could drop. I have covered the normal stuff. I just spoke really fast today. So, reach out if you have any other questions or join that Thursday session. Yeah, and thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Rachel.
Yeah. Bye.